long, horrific months since the war was waged by Russia upon Ukraine. It started with bombings by planes and artillery fire onto the sleeping residential blocks in towns and villages. It started with mile-long columns of tanks and military equipment rolling into peaceful, sleepy rural agrarian places in many places in Ukraine at the same time. I grew up in Ukraine, former Soviet Union, and immigrated to the US with my family at the age of 16. We were brought up hating the wartime. Everyone remembered the aftermath of World War II. Besides living in such historical richness of conflicts in that part of the world, no one wanted another war. I remember my parents tending to our fruit garden and growing strawberries. That place was recently bombed. Every summer as a child, I remember taking trips to the shore of Black Sea to visit my grandmother. That place was recently bombed multiple times. In reality, the war in Ukraine started in 2014 with the annexation of Crimean Peninsula and localized conflict in Donbas region. People of Ukraine have been readying for the larger conflict for 8 years, and yet no one is ever ready for war. For mass evacuations, for bomb shelters, for scattered human limbs, for hungry abandoned dogs and cats roaming the streets, for carpet bombings, for ruins everywhere. Creating this series of works, Meaningful Gestures, was probably the easiest and most difficult at the same time. I started wrapping my head around the small artwork squares sometime in the middle of January, and a few weeks into it, I was working on various ideas and sketches. Towards the end of February, namely the 24th of February, the war in Ukraine broke out. At that moment, it was clear to me that no work could be about something other than the war. However, for the next 2 months, I could not make any artwork. Watching news and nervously scrolling the Ukrainian news and social media channels, we as a local group of immigrants from the former Soviet Union were laser focused and greatly driven on figuring out the humanitarian aid and needs of Ukraine for Ukraine. There wasn't any emotional space left for creative endeavors. When I finally came back to making work for the show sometime in May, I had enough sadness, anxiety, and pride that I made work rather quickly. Ideas behind the work are all war related except for one piece, which had to do with shooting in Uvalde, Texas, which happened at the same time and, quote, perfectly integrated into the stream of already horrific string of news. These small squares needed to differ from each other. I tried to avoid repeating myself. Ideas must be said in different ways, and various thoughts need to be communicated. My figures bounce between abstracted, generalized humanoids and somewhat accurate, figurative outlines. They're all minimal abstractions. The title of the series, Meaningful Gestures, formed immediately before drawing anything. I knew that Russians were making meaningless gestures by waging meaningless war. They created chaos, devastation, death, destruction, deepest sorrow, and unwittingly witnessed unprecedented unity on the opposing side. The light bearers are on the right side of history, united they're even stronger conceptually. Works presented here are chronologically a few months behind. They are in the beginning of the war. They're mainly about the emotional pain which the war inflicts upon us. And I'm yet to draw large-scale civilian destruction which is taking place throughout the Russian offensive. I know there are many more squares to come as the war rages on. And I also wanted to say that we're very lucky. Ukraine is unlucky to have such a horrible neighbor as Russia, but Ukraine is also very lucky to have the whole world sort of to be on its side and help. A lot of help comes its way.
So, a couple of things. One, I don't think it's really necessarily apparent with Elvira's work, but these are pastels. And
wow.
Just, yeah. And the second thing is that we as curators will donate $100 to World Kitchen, not from ARC or from Elvira, but just we will on any work that's purchased from this series. And then I thought I would just read you the titles. The two up the top left are only a diptych. And I imagine it is referenced back to the strawberries of your childhood, but it's strawberries on his lap. After that, it starts to get more intense. This one right here is background unchecked, which I assume is Vivaldi. Yes. And then this one is Bucha, the afterlife of aftermath. Then you come down to the next one, which is No Turning Back. Delusional with little hope for recovery. Blood Blue Smear. Bomb Shelter. Grievers 1 and Grievers 2. My Madonna of the Deepest Tragedy. Meaningful Gestures 2. Meaningful Empty Hugs. Limbs for Rockets. And Meaningful Gestures 1. And Russist Rockets Rupture Ukrainian Sky.
Yeah, this last one is interesting that I was walking with my daughter. You know how in some places in parks or on the shore, there are these kind of like small telescopes you drop 25 cents or now 50 cents in places and you can see the sky. And we were walking at that time and you just look at it and at the time there was this sort of outcry in Ukraine, protect our skies, cover our skies. So it was sort of, and at the same time there's this telescope, like my daughter leaned on it and kind of almost looked, it's peaceful, right? Like you're looking at the peaceful sky, but it almost looked like one of those rockets that you kept seeing and, discarded or like in these media news coverage photographs. So it's kind of this dichotomy. This piece here, Limbs for Rockets, there was this, now it's constant, but some of the sort of initial images that you get, there was a doctor who was carrying a 13-year-old and she had no arms and no feet because of her home was bombed and her mother also, I think, lost a limb and her brother was killed in that bombing. Dad was serving in the army and I was looking at it, just so hot. So, it's really pretty, but it's not. There was another really potent image when there was a big resistance in one of the towns, Mariupol. I don't know if you've heard. For months they were bombing, and they were bombing with these outlawed phosphorus bombs, thermal. May not be saying it right, but they're kind of like thermal bombs. So they don't destruct a lot, but if they land, they explode with such heat that they burn everything to the ground. But when they fall through the night sky, it looks like this absolutely mesmerizing and beautiful fireworks. And you look at it and you just can't believe how much pain and destruction this
beauty
kind of
and the
thing
beast.
can cause.
Yeah, I think that one of the things is that these works are not easy, but I certainly will own one, and I think that they serve a function in many cases they're just really beautiful images, but they also serve the purpose of bearing witness, and I think that's important.
Strong work.
Any questions for Elvira? No questions?
Well, I probably wasn't here when you mentioned that. Probably you already mentioned that. Can you just give us an insight of meaningful gestures? One example of that.
Meaningful gestures. I think it's a play on words more than anything else,
That's
right? Yeah, it's so I in the beginning of the discussion now, the war has kind of overcome the political threshold, and there's a lot of help for Ukraine, and that is why they're able to resist and stay as a country, and hopefully we'll believe they win. But it's of course predictable. But yeah, at the moment when I was drawing this, there was such an outcry for help, and there was a lot of meaningful talk, but very meaningless gestures. So I felt like it was kind of reversed. So it's kind of an irony.
Playing words.
Okay, well, thank you so much. We'll be hanging out here for a while. If anybody has any questions for any of the artists before they take off. And artists, if you didn't get your catalog yet, I think most of you got catalogs, but if you didn't get a catalog, get one from me before you leave.
Thank you, Elvira.
Thank you, everybody.